That's Debatable is sponsored by MB&G. MB&G is specialists in the esoteric world of vehicle and furniture warranty insurance, delivering quite marvellous customer service, prompt claims payment, and a highly developed understanding of how to deliver these products in a way that is both compliant with the regulations and attractive to customers. To find out more, call Paul Smith, the Managing Director, on 07887 501 441. That's 07887 501 441. Hello and welcome to That's Debatable, the weekly news podcast of the Free Speech Union. And we welcome back all of our listeners and all of our viewers, and welcome back to you as well, Jen. I'm wearing a nice summery top today because I think we're seeing the sun for a while, maybe. Probably by the time this goes out, we may be under cloud cover again.
Yeah, well, luckily I'm looking really wintry, so that's we'll cover all bases.
Yeah, that's right. We can cover the rainstorm.
Not that matters to the listeners.
No, well, quite. And of course, I heard over the weekend as well, Jen, did you hear this news story that there's government funding being put into this idea of reflecting sunlight back into space?
I ignored it because it was straight away people were getting hysterical. So
people were getting hysterical about it. But all I thought was, if they do that, I'm going to have to change my wardrobe. That was my first thought. But you're right. I did notice a lot of hysterical reaction to that. But it's been an eventful couple of weeks. Obviously, the death of the Pope and the funeral of the Pope took place just over the weekend. And we were talking as well, weren't we, about different TV programs that it's well worth catching up on. Things like Conclave. We were talking about whether is it woke, is it not woke? Well, we leave it to viewers and listeners to work that one out. I like The Young Pope with Jude Law, which was on a series a few years ago. That's a great little series. And we were also talking, the other one I like is called Habemus Papa, which is a sort of art house Italian film. But I'm getting into the mode of a lot of Vatican TV at the moment because I find it fascinating.
Yeah, well, I did find Conclave sort of interesting, but I also fell asleep. And then I had to rewind it to find out what was going on. And then and then the ending. Which we won't mention in case nobody has people.
We won't mention the ending, but we're at that age, aren't we, Jan? We get very excited about watching something, and then we got a glass of wine or whatever. And before you know it, halfway through the film, we'll miss most of it.
I couldn't work out anyway because there's just a lot of nuns and a lot of cardinals, so trying to work out who said what.
Yeah, that tends to be quite
like the interiors. I could almost smell the interiors of marble-lined bedrooms and old-fashioned Italian furniture. I could sort of smell it from many a holiday rental.
It's lovely. Absolutely wonderful. Let's launch into our first item for today's episode, back in the world of free speech. We start off in the world of non-crime hate incidents, these items, these things that we have talked about. Probably 1 in 2 episodes we end up talking about non-crime hate incidents or NCHIs. But what we want to talk about today is that Harry Miller from Fair Cop has done a really interesting piece of work. He's sent out a whole load of freedom of information requests. I think he sent it to all of the police forces in England and Wales. Only 15 responded to him. Because his question was, what analysis are you doing with the data you collect from your NCHIs, your non-crime hate incidents? So that question went out to all the forces, but only 15 came back to him, 14 police forces replied, none. So what analysis are you doing? None. And in fact, only West Yorkshire Police admitted to carrying out any sort of data analysis, and they said that trends were examined at a local level. Now, why is this important? Well, it's pretty important because back in November 2024, and this wasn't the only time this was said, but in Parliament, in the House of Lords, Lord Hanson, who's a Home Office minister, said to peers, it is vital that police monitor non-crime hate incidents when proportionate and necessary to do so to help prevent serious crimes. In other words, it's this line, this story that the NCHI data is very, very valuable, and it's used to spot patterns and identify where things may flare up, or indeed where a crime might happen. But what Harry Miller has discovered is it doesn't seem, certainly from these freedom of information responses, that that's really happening down on the ground. And I think that's a really powerful move forward in this whole discussion around NCHIs, kind of potentially pulls the rug out from this justification that actually we're going to be analysing lots of data. And the last thing I'd say on this, Jan, of course, is that it chimes with what we did at the Free Speech Union. We went out to all police forces with a question to analyse the effect of the new guidance that came out. I think it was under Suella Braverman. And we wanted us to ask police forces how many non-crime hate incidents had they recorded before the guidance versus how many non-crime hate incidents they were recording after the guidance came out, with a hope, an expectation that might be going down. But one of the big things I took away from that, and remember talking in detail with Toby about this, is that the data was just not consistent. Even within the same police force, with the same question, I noticed that I got completely different responses in terms of the granularity of the information, the reliability of the information, and had to throw out and completely discount 6 or 7, I think it was. It's all written up, and there's a briefing note on the website, freespeechunion.org. But I had to throw out the data from 6 or 7 police forces because it wasn't consistent. Now, you could argue that there's a layer there of how police forces respond to freedom of information requests rather than how they actually use the data. That's a fair point. It might just be that they're not necessarily very good at responding to freedom of information requests, but very good at using the data. But I think what Harry Miller's done is really push that forwards and say, no, it does seem there's just not a lot of analysis being done, and obviously a lot of those police forces didn't come back to Harry, so that begs all sorts of other kinds of questions. I don't know what jumped out to you, Jan, when you read this, and whether you felt this was surprising or not.
I would encourage people to watch the video of our Belfast speakeasy, which happened a couple of weeks ago, at which Harry Miller spoke, and that's up on our YouTube channel. So that's what he speaks about this. So that's worth watching. So it was the first thing I thought about. It reminded me of that, but I think there's just this interesting phenomenon where a kind of highfalutin idea, which is what Harry talks about, this kind of theory of cause and effect, and how if you can sort of stem early on and do early intervention in the kind of brewing of social conflict, if you do early intervention, you can somehow prevent it then growing into something else down the line. And that was the kind of thinking that was very prevalent at the time when NCHIs were introduced. And that was often dressed up as kind of research. This will help us develop policy. And this went beyond policing as well. But obviously it just turns into, very, very quickly, almost immediately, just a bureaucratic exercise, and something that's performative, really, because it allows public bodies to say that they're doing some kind of extraordinarily innovative thing that's going to transform everything. And of course, it just becomes an exercise, and then it becomes mutated into something else. So it becomes this exercise basically in keeping intelligence on people, and a kind of way of having this very bureaucratic surveillance going on, in effect. So it's this kind of weird combination of kind of high ideas and quite ideologically sort of revolutionary ideas about how we're going to change society and we'll wipe out racism or whatever, and then or misogyny. That's the other one that they've talked about this in relation to. But then it just turns into this plodding kind of bureaucratic exercise, which is nevertheless authoritarian. So there's I don't know how you describe what that tendency is, but it's very familiar to the way we kind of understand the state working, I think, at the moment. And it's really helpful to know that this is what's happened, and that they probably haven't got a Thomas Harris data analyst in every police force in the UK. It's hard to imagine who's doing this, or that they even know what research is. I mean, it's not like you'd
Yeah.
expect every police force to have a research department that really knows how to objectively understand their data. So,
And it's
you
not
know,
easy to cut data. I mean, I'm fortunate in that, obviously I have a natural love of data and numbers and patterns, and it is about patterns, and it's also about slightly changing direction. Your data analysis changes direction depending on what comes out of the data set. You can't really prejudge it, barring things like clinical trials, which have to be double blind and completely planned ahead of time. The thing I really like about analyzing data is it actually tells you what it wants you to understand from it. I find this again and again and again. But you're right. It's not everyone has a desire or an understanding of what jumps out from data. And yet, as you say, the wheels of bureaucracy turn. The phrase that comes to mind when you mention the bureaucratic reality of NCHIs was Byzantine. So
mhm.
not wanting to go straight to the Roman Empire again, but at least we've got our thinking about the Roman Empire for today done. But this is the Eastern Empire, obviously famously known for just bureaucracy and layers and layers and layers of office space and offices. And I think you're right. I think the bureaucracy takes over just so easy. It's such a natural tendency. But there is an additional part to this story, which is the Conservatives, so the official opposition. They are tabling an amendment to the Crime and Policing Bill to abolish non-crime hate incidents. So it's not exactly the same story in so much as it's not because of the Harry Miller analysis. It's because of the much more general problem with non-crime hate incidents that's really come to the fore over the last 6 to 9 months. And really, particularly after in the fallout from the Alison Pearson doorstepping on Remembrance Sunday, the Conservatives, so the Shadow Home Secretary, who's called Chris Philp, is tabling this amendment. And you reminded me before we click record, Jan, that we want to encourage all of our listeners, all of our viewers to go to our website, click on campaigns, and there's a template letter that you can fill in, and it will go to your MP to write and ask them to support that amendment that Chris Philp will be tabling. So that is one of many campaigns. You can also, if you go to campaigns on our website, you'll see quite a few are ongoing, including the Banter Bouncer campaign, which is clause 20 of the Employment Rights Bill. It was clause 18, but it's changed to clause 20. So that is something we definitely wanted to get out there and encourage our members to write to their MP. We should move on, though. I fear, don't we, Jan? I fear we talk about non-crime hate incidents so much that we probably they become very tiresome, but they are very
Oh, they really
pernicious.
matter. I mean, I think they do matter, and it's become internationally a point of ridicule. So
Yes.
yeah, they're important.
Yes. Our next item is obviously still very much in the world of free speech and free expression. This item now is reported in the Telegraph, and it's about Renaud Camus, who's a French philosopher. He has been banned from entering the United Kingdom because of his controversial views on immigration, and is preparing to challenge that decision by the Home Office with our support. So, with the support of the Free Speech Union. What happened is that the Home Office concluded his presence in the UK would not be conducive to the public good. And that phrase appears under Section 35A of the Immigration Act 1971. That provides the Home Secretary with the power to deport or refuse entry to any non-UK national if their presence is deemed not conducive to the public good. Now, that is all for the good, that law, in the sense of obviously any country, every country has to control its borders, has to decide who should be allowed in, what kind of people should not be allowed in. Are they going to cause trouble of any kind, all sorts of kinds? So in principle, that makes sense. You have to have an intelligence service that knows who is going in and out of the country in order to protect the citizenry. But I think the concern here, Jan, there are several concerns, but one of the concerns I get a sense of is that of scope creep. And what happens is that the guidance associated with how that part of immigration law is interpreted uh, now allows exclusion on broader and broader public interest grounds. And in fact, the guidance says includes phrases such as the potential for an individual's views to foster inter-community tension, to incite hatred, or otherwise undermine social cohesion. Now, and the problem there, I think, Jan, is those are quite slippery words in the world of free expression, in the world of free speech, and we know that, we've seen that, and particularly when it comes to something like the debate around immigration, it is all too easy to box someone up and say your view on immigration is in the deplorable box rather than in the acceptable conversation box. And it does seem that that's what's happened here. So just to give a bit of background on Renaud Camus, he is associated with the so-called Great Replacement theory, which argues that Europe's indigenous populations are being gradually displaced by migrants. So this is a thorny issue, I think, isn't it, Jan, when you actually get into the detail of it. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, in some ways it's thorny. In other ways, it should be quite simple, which is that people with ideas that other people don't like or governments don't like should be allowed to come into countries. I mean, if they're not inciting violence, and I don't think he's inciting violence. I mean, it might be that he's part of a movement on the fringes of which people are violent, but that doesn't mean that he's responsible for that. So I think it's there's a difference between security and threats to security and disruption and or social conflict. And at the moment, we all know that immigration is the huge issue that everybody is talking about. Whichever way they're coming at it, everybody's talking about it. So the idea that you can somehow tidy up, tidy things up by keeping people away or stopping people hearing ideas is going to really, really badly backfire. And it has to be aired. It just has to be aired. And whether he's a whack job who lives in a castle, as some people might see him, or other people who would think that what he's saying is the truth, it doesn't matter. The fact is, if he's not seeking to stir up violence, then he should be allowed in. And we have to be consistent on these things. It's very easy to. So, like when it was first reported that he was being banned. The problem we've got at the moment is I think that we're in these very, very simplistic camps a lot of the time. So people either think, oh yeah, he's our guy because he's saying something a bit like what I think, or he's a kind of despicable racist who shouldn't be anywhere in society. And that's just not a workable. It's just not a workable way of. It's not an adult way of understanding the world. He might say some things that I might agree with, and other things I really don't. So that it doesn't. To me, it doesn't matter. That's the way we have to work our way through ideas at the moment. It's not about good guys and bad guys, and similarly, just ridiculing him or kind of trying to put him in the racist box that doesn't work anymore as a sorting tool. Racist, not racist, I don't think. I mean, it matters to know what he thinks and whether he calls himself a racist or not, or whether what he says can be understood as racist, even if he himself denies it. He says, I make cultural and civilizational distinctions rather than biological or racial ones. But obviously, cultural and civilizational statements based on a kind of valuing of different people very, very differently can also be hierarchical. It can also be distinctly prejudiced and discriminatory. So, these things, they're not simple. And I think to kind of look for simple solutions by putting people into sorting boxes that then we can kind of shove the box away once we've tidied them into that particular, the racist camp or this, I don't think it's going to help us work our way through these big, big questions which at the end of the day are so fundamental about belonging, identity, national sovereignty, democracy. What kind of values do we live by? What seems to be the case is that lots of people are recognizing that diversity isn't a value really. It's just it's a very weak value, and it's something that lots of people are reacting against. And some of the reactions will be very destructive. And I don't want to be camped in with those people personally. Other people will be wanting to find a way through that's not naive or just kind of wet liberal. It's actually a kind of more muscular response that's about recognizing we can't just go back. You can't undo. You're not going to, no matter what some people want, you can't deport everybody that's come. You're going to have to work out how we work with who's here. Yes, enforce borders, but we've got to work with the present and then have some kind of vision of the future. At the moment, we're in this really stuck situation, which can lead to this kind of very, very simplistic tribal responses, which I don't think are very helpful. But the free speech point here is that I don't want my government deciding who can or can't come in unless they actually are going to threaten my safety. And I don't think he is.
And I think your point about it's really quite simple is quite key and actually quite profound, because it says a lot about where we find ourselves in this moment, that we can't see that it's quite simple. We can't see that it's quite a clear distinction actually between being someone who comes in and is a terrorist threat, for example, or is absolutely going to kind of stir things up and create violence on the streets, or have a high risk of violence on the streets, versus someone who has unpalatable ideas according to the prevailing winds of the time. Those are two very, very different things. One will end up having a coffee break in a conference center, and that's as far as it goes. But you might not like the ideas that are being talked about. And on the flip side, it's obviously very different. I think that's a really important point. It is very easy to feel it's in these polarized times. Oh, maybe it is more complicated. But it has some nuance. But at root, it's a fairly simple distinction. And I think that's a very important point here.
And we need to be consistent. There's lots of people that lots of us would want to not have coming in to speak.
Well, President Trump's a good example, isn't he? A lot of people say, "Oh, what? We don't want him. We don't want him." And the first time he came, there were all the protest, absolutely, but you shouldn't have the veto. Certainly not to stop the President of the United States coming in.
Yeah, and there's so much of this. We don't like this performer. We don't want this preacher. This kind of idea that you can just, and obviously it's very live discussion because of what's going on in the States and the kind of big debate about deportations over there. You can't. I don't want to live in a country that just kicks people out because they are against my views, or those of the way my political grouping, or what the government wants to judge. Because and I think that there is such an inconsistency here. I was remembering back to when the Dutch politician, I think it's Geert Wilders or Geert Wilders.
We'll take it, Jan. We'll take it.
I know, was banned in 2000, or prevented from coming here in 2009 to speak at the House of Lords on the grounds that he would threaten community harmony and threaten public safety. But then he went on in 2023 to win a quarter of the vote in the Dutch elections, and then to be in a position to form a government with other parties. So the idea that you could prevent somebody who then becomes a leader of another country, or he didn't actually become PM, but was close to it. But then again, Wilders himself thinks the Quran, or was argued in the past that the Quran should be banned. So we have to find our own consistent path through these things. You can't just say, well, he's our guy or he's not our guy. That's not, you've got to, the responsibility is to be independent yourself, and obviously as the FSU as an organisation to do that collectively as well.
But we are we're helping with there's a quote from Lord Young in the Telegraph. We reached out to the French philosopher to see if he'd like any help in appealing the decision, and he said yes. So I anticipate that we're going to be getting an immigration lawyer on the case. And then he went on, I don't think the common good is endangered by inviting people to set out their contentious views in the public square, particularly not someone as distinguished as Mr. Camus. And he goes on to say it seemed tin-eared for the Home Office to impose the ban while Sir Keir Starmer is attempting to secure a trade deal with Mr. Trump, given the US State Department has recently expressed concerns about freedom of expression in the UK, which I think is a really good point as well. That this was something raised in the Oval Office, and yet back at base we have this sort of thing happening, this kind of stopping someone coming into the country.
Yeah. It doesn't matter if he's distinguished or not, in my view.
Yeah.
The only thing that means is that he's obviously presumably not going to stand on the street corner and tell people to take up arms there and then. So that's the difference. And he's got credentials. He was a travel writer. He's a literary critic. He's not he's not even a politician. He's somebody who has moved into this space, which is a lot of people are there in France. This kind of ethno-nationalism is very strong in France. I'm just reading Michel Houellebecq's book, the latest one, and the novelist, and this is always the theme.
You're never allowed to leave the Free Speech Union, Jan. You keep all of us honest. I love the fact you're right. I totally agree with that consistency that you're bringing to that. There, saying, yeah, you're right. It doesn't matter whether he's distinguished or not. So we're never going to let you go. I'm afraid, Jan. You're here forever.
Well, good. I'm not sure that's your decision, but anyway.
No, it's certainly not my decision.
I had a really vivid memory there over the weekend. I don't remember why it came up now, but it's kind of related to this. I visited the Soviet Union in the 80s with my family. That was our only family holiday abroad. It tells you something of where our family...
Where should we go? Let's go.
Tells you something of my family's political background, which obviously was fascinating, and I was very grateful to my parents for taking me there. But I do remember the point where we landed and we were going through security at the airport, and I was probably, 14, and suddenly a feeling of fear about what books we brought with us. And all our groups started talking about, what have we got in our bags, and kind of slightly joking, but at the same time genuinely being worried about. I think I might have had a Jeffrey Archer novel with me, and that sense of not knowing, but also not knowing whether it would be just a confiscation if they disapproved, or whether it would be some kind of punishment or whatever. And again, or refusal of entry on my family holiday. So that kind of for a book. So I do think that for an idea. So I think there are these things we should recall, that what it looks like when states get heavy,
and what it feels like,
ideas,
and what it feels like, and the fact that we're starting to feel that here, and not just starting. It's really we're well on track to feel that here. And actually, that's a nice link, I think, into our last item, which is called Journalism in the Dock. There's a new briefing paper that's just come out on our website. So if you go to our website, freespeechunion.org, go to briefings, you'll see the latest briefing. It's a 16-page briefing by I'm trying to remember, by Trevor Kavanagh. And it's entitled Sir Keir Starmer's Baseless Prosecution of Tabloid Journalists as Director of Public Prosecutions. And why do I say that the point you just made resonates? It's because it's all about freedom of the press. And it's about an episode where that freedom of the press so obviously came under attack. And all the way through, as I was reading it, it's written, it's obviously by someone who writes things dramatically, but it's written dramatically. And you get that fear factor. It was really, really jumped off the page to me, that fear factor of what it feels like to have a police raid in and on your family home, with children present, with infants present, with old, sick relatives present, and the utter turmoil, and then the sort of purgatorial existence you live after that raid while you're out on bail waiting for what happens next. That dreadful sense of the sword of Damocles hanging over you. And eventually, in this case, and remind me of the name of the operation.
Operation Elvedon. So this was started back in 2011, and it came hot off the press, on the back of the closing down of the News of the World newspaper in 2011, and the phone hacking scandal, which had led to the closing of the News of the World, Leveson inquiry. This is the whole context where tabloid journalism more broadly was in the dock, and the kind of techniques of muckraking, basically, which is what, and that's the derogatory way of putting at it, or you could say investigative journalism. These two are not clearly separated. And so this was Operation Elvedon was launched, weirdly enough, by the company that owned the Sun newspaper. It opened up its files to the police and kind of said, "Oh, look, we've got evidence that our journalists have been paying public officials, for example, police officers, to act as whistleblowers in order to get information that's in the public interest." And the Sun kind of handed over its own staff to the police, which is pretty shocking. And 29 journalists were charged with the offence of conspiracy to commit misconduct in public office. Now, there were convictions, but they were of the whistleblowers themselves because they were people in public office. But of those 29 journalists charged with the other side of the equation, if you like, of handing over the money to the public official, only one of them was successfully prosecuted, Anthony France, and then his conviction was subsequently overturned on appeal. And he's going to be speaking at an event we're doing tonight, which is Monday night, and it will. But by the end of this week, the video will be available for people to view. So we've got an event with Trevor Kavanagh speaking, setting out the argument that he makes in the briefing, which is essentially it's that Keir Starmer was the Director of Public Prosecutions at the time of Operation Elvedon and was a great enthusiast for this attempted prosecution of journalists. And so Kavanagh is saying that Starmer's words last year that he was a great defender of the free speech run rather hollow, and we need to have a conversation about this. So these journalists, 29 of them, were, as you say, their homes were raided, their computers were taken, all devices. It was dawn raids, basically. It was extraordinary kind of spectacle, really. It was done in a very way that was designed to chill. And they were then investigated for 5 years. So it's apparently it's the most expensive prosecution ever. So it's something like £14 million it cost to investigate this. And there was only one successful prosecution of a journalist. So as I say, there were convictions on the other side of the equation. But it's it's the largest and costliest investigation in the history of Scotland Yard. And that really does say something, and obviously to have completely failed at great public expense. So
I think bigger than the Great Train Robbery, he says, and various other things. Now I don't know whether that's inflation adjusted, but I mean it's absolutely.
And at one stage during one of the hearings, Lord Chief Justice Thomas said to the prosecutors, "Have you at any stage considered the freedom of the press?" Which, and you think, yes, because that's the principle which you've got to stick to, because then you have to defend the muckraking, you have to defend the kind of people playing the edges, because in order to make it possible for, say, for example, the Sunday Times to expose the thalidomide scandal back in the 60s, where they paid for data from the drug companies via whistleblowers, in order to blow the lid off that scandal, or for the MP's expenses scandal when was that, the 90s, when the Telegraph paid sources for the data, revealing MP's expenses. In order for those very important exposés to happen, you have to be open to the fact that other things are going to be paid for as well. And it might be a bit of celebrity tittle tattle, or it might be a kind of low level public official. But you've got to accept that that's what freedom of the press means. It's going to be sometimes scandalous, and sometimes it's going to be, morally on the high ground, but you've got to have this kind of openness. So I think it'll be a really interesting discussion tonight, because, we're not used to having a proper defense of tabloid techniques. we just rely on them. We don't really, I say tabloid, I mean proper journalistic techniques, but they're most maligned when the tabloid press do them. So I think it will be a really interesting conversation. We've got Trevor Kavanagh, Anthony France, who's now crime editor of The Standard, but was at The Sun and was prosecuted, and Sir Geoffrey Cox, KC, and MP, who successfully defended the Sun's deputy editor, Jeff Webster. And actually, I'm really, really pleased because a lot of the journalists who were caught up in this are going to come. So we've got a packed event of about, I don't know, be about 170 people at this event. And we've got about 15 to 20 of them will be journalists who with a direct skin in the game on this. So I think it'll be really interesting to hear from them because they haven't really told their story. And in sort of setting up this event, I've had a few kind of email exchanges with some of them, and they're just the ones who were subject to the Dawn raids and these prolonged periods on of investigation were just destroyed by it, utterly destroyed. They were so frightened that they'd be going to prison, and it was held over them for 5 years. So I think it's a good, really, really good thing that we've published this and brought this story to light.
It's astonishing, that fifth pillar of of the freedoms that we protect, the freedom of the press. It's not one that we think of first, because we kind of think that with the news, with the 24-hour news cycle, with all the things beaming into our living rooms and all the things that are being written online and all the comment and all the opinion, we think, yeah, the press is healthy. It might be biased. We might not like some of the things the state broadcasters say in particular, but it's free. There are alternatives. There are all sorts of outlets. And what really struck me was the horror of what happened during this operation over this period of time. And as you say, the utter devastation it wrought on real good, actually very good journalists.
Well, and then the chilling effect. So the fact that radiates out throughout the profession, that's the worrying thing, I think. You can, really. So that'll be very interesting to hear from people what their view is on that. What's been the long-term effects on journalism?
Any other events, Jan, to touch on?
Yeah. So this Wednesday. So if you're listening to this podcast as soon as it comes out, you've still got time, if they haven't sold out, to sign up, get tickets for our Edinburgh event, Edinburgh Speakeasy, on Wednesday, the 30th of April. If you go to our website, just go to the events page and then it will take you straight through to tickets. That's not going to be live streamed, but a video will go up probably just for members, that one. And that's on policing in Scotland. So police priorities. We've got a really good panel of lawyers, former police, just very, very experienced people. So that's going to be very good. And we've got that will cover things like NCHIs that we've been talking about, hate crime, two-tier policing, and also the kind of policing of women's speech that's gone on. So it's the kind of first time that people in Scotland have got a chance to get together and discuss the implications of the Equality Act, Supreme Court clarification. What was it now, a week and a half ago? So that will be interesting. We always have a great crowd up in Edinburgh, so do come along to that. We've got another Edinburgh one later in May as well on religious expressions. The two kind of go together. And then also we've got, I'm really pleased, so Andrew Doyle, as everybody will know, Free Speech Nation, GB News, Titania McGrath, etc.
Dr. Andrew Doyle.
Dr. Andrew Doyle has got a new book coming out called The End of Woke. And we are going to be having an exclusive online interview with him. It's going to be live. All our members can join it and ask questions. So that's great because it is exclusive and it's a real perk of membership that you get to listen into that. And it's only online. So we'll be sending out the link to that in the newsletter. So just keep an eye out for the weekly newsletter and any kind of emails from FSU events, and then you'll get a link to subscribe for that particular event that will be on Zoom. But it is going to be in a studio. It'll be either me or Toby in conversation with Andrew in a podcast studio. So it'll be quite a nice event, a bit of an experiment for us. And then lots of other events that you'll see if you go to our website and go to the events page.
Which we've mentioned 3 times now, freespeechunion.org. There's an events page.
There's so much on there. People should get used to going there. And if they remember, log in, because then you see content that you wouldn't otherwise, that other people can't see. So people should get used to using their logins and really make the most of what they get for membership.
Yeah, and there is just now 5 years worth of briefings and FAQs on different free speech situations. And as you say, events and videos and podcasts from earlier on in the last 5 years. Free speech has moved on a lot in 5 years in terms of the issues of the day, but none of the principles have changed. So that sort of cumulative effect, that cumulative store of free speech information is huge. Huge.
Yeah, and then we've got the news blog as well, which Freddie Attenborough, who also writes the Friday weekly update that all the members get. If you get used to going there every day, you'll get fresh stories every single day, which is really, really good way of keeping abreast of all the free
His
speech.
quill never stops, does
I
Freddie?
know. God knows. I don't know how he does it. But yes.
That, I think, is all we have for this week. So thank you to all of our listeners and to all of our viewers, and we will wish you a lovely, hopefully very sunny week ahead. But thank you, and that's it for today. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.